In this story, in an ordinary hospital, a nurse became a heroine by stepping between an attacker and a veteran's dog. 7 stab wounds almost took her life, but her courage started an unexpected chain. 24 hours later, 300 Navy SEALs arrived ready to protect her. The clock struck 7 in the morning, and in the hospital another busy day was beginning. The hallways lit up with the first light of the sun coming through the long windows, and the murmur of doctors, patients, and families formed a constant echo. For most, it was just another day, with the routine that comes with any health center. Checkups, medications, care, and that silent struggle between life and illness. For Laura, the nurse in a white coat with a tired but genuine smile, it also seemed like a normal day. She had been working in that hospital for more than 8 years, and although many times she had thought about looking for a quieter place, something in her heart told her that she was meant to be there. Her vocation was not only a profession, it was a way of life. Every patient was a reminder of why she had chosen nursing: to care, to protect, to accompany those who felt vulnerable. Laura had learned that the hospital was not just a cold building with gray walls. It was also a place of stories, of second chances, and of inevitable farewells. She had seen tears of pain, but also hugs of joy. She had been beside those who welcomed a new life, and beside those who closed their eyes for the last time. That contrast had made her strong, but never indifferent. That morning, like every day, she first went to the emergency room. She greeted her colleagues, gave quick smiles to patients, and picked up her notebook. Her walk was light, as if her feet knew every corner of the hospital by heart. Nobody knew, but before starting she always said a small prayer in silence. She asked for patience, she asked for calm, and she asked for the strength to be useful in the hardest moments. Among all the patients she recognized in the hallways, there was one in particular who always caught her attention. A war veteran who often came to his medical appointments with a large dog, a German shepherd with a noble look. He was not just any dog. He was his battle companion, his guardian, and his comfort during heavy nights of memories. Laura had cared for him more than once and always stopped to pet the animal, who wagged his tail with gratitude. That silent bond that had grown between them made every meeting different. Laura felt deep respect for the veteran, but also for his dog, whom she treated with the same care as any human patient. And although everything seemed normal on the surface, that bond would be the spark that set off a chain of events no one in that hospital could imagine. The shift went on, the smell of fresh coffee mixed with a scent of disinfectant, and conversations intertwined in a constant flow of voices. Outside, the city went on with its rhythm. Inside, every second could mean the difference between life and death. Laura knew it, and for that reason she never let down her guard. That day had started normally. Routine notes, giving medicine, checking on post-op patients. She even allowed herself a small break to look out the window and think about what she would do after her shift. She planned to stop by the corner store and buy flowers for her mother, because it had been weeks since she last visited her. It seemed like a day just like any other, but it was not. What Laura could not suspect was that behind that calm surface, a shadow was forming that would test not only her vocation, but her entire life. What looked like an ordinary shift, with laughter among colleagues and the comings and goings of nurses, was in reality the prelude to a storm. A storm that would soon break out with the violence of lightning. The hospital, with its walls that had seen so much, was about to witness something that would mark its history. Laura, without knowing it, was walking toward a destiny that would unite her life with that of a veteran, a dog, and very soon, with hundreds of men she never imagined would stand by her side. The hospital was a place of fleeting encounters. Patients came and went, faces changed every day, and many times the routine left no room to remember each name. But there were people who, even if they were not there every day, left a mark impossible to ignore. One of them was Don Ernesto, a man a little over 60 years old, with gray hair and a deep look, who always arrived accompanied by his dog, Rocco, a large German shepherd, obedient and with a noble expression. Don Ernesto had been a war veteran. He did not speak much about his past, but in his slow walk and in the visible scars on his arms and legs, one could guess a life marked by battles not only fought in the field, but also in the mind. He had learned to live with memories that visited him at night and often left him sleepless. His dog was, in those moments, his refuge, his guardian, and in a certain way, his salvation. Laura had known him for a couple of years. Whenever he came for an appointment, she offered to accompany him, not only as a nurse but also as a friend. She liked to listen to him, even if he did not always say much. However, when it came to speaking about Rocco, his eyes lit up immediately. "This dog saved my life more than once," he used to say with a tired smile, stroking the animal's back. "He's not just a dog, miss. He's my war brother." Rocco had been trained as a service dog. He had learned to detect anxiety attacks, to react to loud noises, and to stay firm even in the middle of chaos. He was more than company. He was an extension of Ernesto, and Laura, who always stopped to observe them, found in that relationship a lesson of pure loyalty, one of those rarely seen in the world. Many times, after the checkups, Laura would bend down to pet the dog, who wagged his tail right away. "You're a good boy, Rocco," she would say softly, as if speaking to a child. "Take care of your human, okay?" Don Ernesto looked at her with a mix of gratitude and respect. For him, who had learned to distrust people, it was strange to find someone who treated his dog with so much affection. Laura did not see a simple animal. She saw a life companion. In those encounters, the nurse began to understand a little more about the weight carried by veterans like Ernesto. They were not only physical scars. It was the loneliness, the silence, and the memories that often could not be shared with anyone. Rocco, with his faithful gaze, seemed to be the only one who understood everything without the need for words. Sometimes, in the quick talks after the appointment, Ernesto would let slip scattered phrases from his past. "There are things one never forgets, miss, things that follow you even if 30 years have passed. But as long as he is with me, I know I can keep going." Laura nodded, without judging, without pressing. Her job was not to heal those invisible wounds, but she could accompany, listen, and offer a bit of humanity in a world that often forgot men like Ernesto. The hospital staff was divided in their opinions. Some thought it was excessive to allow such a large dog into certain areas. Others understood that it was part of the veterans' treatment. Laura, without hesitation, always defended Rocco's presence. She knew he was not just any dog, but a trained, disciplined companion, absolutely necessary for his owner's emotional health. That bond between man and animal awakened a deep admiration in Laura. She had seen many stories in the hospital. Patients who recovered thanks to the love of their families, others who sank into loneliness. But in Ernesto and Rocco she saw a different story, a kind of silent pact that went beyond words. What she did not know was that this connection, which seemed only another detail in her daily routine, would soon place her in the middle of an event that would change not only her life, but also Ernesto's and, without knowing it, would draw the attention of men who had once been in the same battlefields. The afternoon went on, and while Ernesto slowly left the hospital with Rocco at his side, Laura watched them from the window. A strange feeling took over her. A premonition, a kind of shadow she could not explain. She did not know why, but she felt that this story was not yet finished, and that soon she would be more involved than she ever imagined. The hospital clock struck 10 at night. The night shift was always different. The hallways became quieter, the white light seemed colder, and the sounds were reduced to distant footsteps, the constant beeping of machines, and the whisper of nurses speaking softly so as not to wake the patients. For Laura, that night seemed like another calm shift, one of those that move slowly, where the tiredness is felt but the atmosphere invites peace. However, There was something in the air that did not fit. Since she arrived at her post, a strange feeling had settled in her chest. She could not explain it. There were no screams, no serious emergencies, but every so often she felt as if someone were watching her. A shadow in the hallways, a reflection in the windows, the sound of a door closing for no reason. Maybe it's just the tiredness, she thought, trying to convince herself it was only her imagination. Laura was looking over a file at the nursing station when she heard footsteps that seemed louder than usual. She looked down the hallway, but saw no one, only an empty stretcher at the end, half covered by the dim light. She shook off the unease and forced herself to return to work. A couple of hours later, when she went down to the pharmacy area to get medication, she felt it again. The clear impression that someone was following her. She walked faster, and the echo of her steps seemed to double. "Calm down, Laura," she whispered to herself. But her heart was beating harder. In the inner courtyard of the hospital, where she sometimes went out to get fresh air, she also noticed something strange. The wind moved the dry leaves on the ground, and among the shadows of the garden, she could swear she saw a still figure watching. She stepped back, pressed her lips together, and quickly went back inside. Minutes later, while giving an injection to a patient, he looked at her intently and said with a hoarse voice, "Miss, be careful. I've seen strange men hanging around here." Laura froze for a moment. She did not want to scare him, so she only answered calmly, "Don't worry. Everything is under control. Please rest." But those words stayed with her. Strange men hanging around here. It was not just her imagination. The night went on, and every detail seemed to confirm her suspicions. The security guard was not at his usual post. The main hallway camera flickered as if it were failing, and at the side entrance someone had left the door unlocked. Small failures that would normally go unnoticed, but that night seemed to be part of something more. Laura, despite her calm character, began to feel a slight tremor in her hands. It was not simple fear. It was that intuition that lights up when something is wrong, when calm is not real but only a mask before the storm. Near midnight, while taking a short break in the nurse's room, she overheard two co-workers speaking softly. They say they saw a man outside, near the emergency entrance. A patient? No! He didn't look sick. He was like waiting for something. Laura did not step in. But that conversation was the final confirmation. There was someone watching, someone who did not belong in the hospital. That night, which had begun calmly, was no longer calm. Laura knew it, even though she tried to continue her work as usual. Every step, every look, every shadow seemed to announce that something was coming. And the worst part was that she did not know what or when it would happen. The hospital, that refuge of life, was about to become the stage of something dark. The silence was no longer peace, it was threat. And Laura, without realizing it, was at the center of that tension that would soon explode. Midnight had passed, and the hospital seemed to be holding its breath. Laura walked down the observation hallway with her medicine cart. She checked monitors, adjusted IVs, noted down signs. It was routine, but her senses had been alert since the night before. When she reached the corner that led to the side entrance, she heard a dry sound, like a muffled blow. She stopped. The hallway was in shadow. Only an emergency light drew long shapes on the floor. "Is someone there?" she asked in a firm voice. There was no reply. Silence returned, heavy, as if the entire building had gone still. Laura took a deep breath and stepped forward. Then from the back, Rocco appeared, the veteran's dog. He was loose, ears raised, eyes sharp, but he did not bark. When he saw her, he barely wagged his tail, like greeting her, but he did not relax. He was tense, alert, as if guarding something. "Rocco, what are you doing here, friend?" Laura whispered, crouching a little. "Where is Ernesto?" The dog did not come closer. Instead, He stepped back and looked left toward the side door. Laura followed his gaze and noticed something that froze her blood. The door was not fully closed. It was open a couple of centimeters. Against the metal frame, a gloved hand rested unmoving. Before she could react, the door opened wide, and the attacker entered. He wore a dark hood, his face covered with a black mask and a wide jacket. His eyes, hard and without shine, fixed on Rocco first and then on Laura. In his right hand something gleamed, small and cold. "Back off," he said in a low, hoarse voice. "That dog is coming with me." Rocco bared his teeth, silent. Laura felt the natural impulse to place herself between them. "You're not taking anyone," she answered. "Leave the hospital. Now." The attacker stepped forward quickly. Rocco lunged with a contained growl. But the man swung his arm and pushed him aside, pointing the blade toward the animal. Laura did not think. She simply stepped in. She spread her arms to shield the dog and felt the crash of the man's body against hers. Everything was so fast she didn't even manage to scream. The first stab was like a mute thunder, a dry blow against her side. Laura stepped back half a step, still trying to push the intruder toward the exit. The second came at her shoulder. The third, in her abdomen. The fourth, near her ribs. The fifth, under her collarbone. The sixth, in the arm with which she tried to push him away. The seventh, again at her side, lower down. There was no gush of blood or long scream. There was cut air, a racing heartbeat, the rush of heat rising, and a buzzing in her ears. There was the clear certainty that her body was paying the price of her decision to protect Rocco. "Run," she managed to say, pushing the dog with her hip so he would move away. Rocco did not obey. He stood at her side, pressed against her leg, as if embracing her with his body. He growled again, deeper this time, but did not attack. He seemed to be measuring the distance, waiting for a chance. The attacker raised his hand again, aiming at the dog, and Laura, with the strength she had left, shoved him against the wall. The man staggered, his shoulder hitting the tile, and for a second his breathing faltered. At that moment, light appeared at the end of the hallway. A nurse turned the corner and froze at the sight. Behind her, an orderly leaned in. "Security!" the nurse shouted. "Call security!" The attacker turned his head, calculated quickly, and stepped back. He did not leave. In his eyes there was more than malice. There was obsession. He looked at Laura, looked at the dog, and spoke through clenched teeth. "This isn't over." Laura pressed one hand against the wall to keep from falling. Each breath was an effort, and each second felt like a minute. Even so, she took a step forward, as if her presence alone could trap the man in that hallway. "Get out," she repeated in a fading voice. "You have nothing here." The sound of radios over the intercom broke the moment. Two guards were running closer, their steps pounding through the hallway. The attacker, hearing them, turned and fled through the same door he had come in. The door swung like a pendulum and then stayed half open, hitting the frame with a dull knock that repeated, again and again, like a broken clock. Laura slid down the wall until she was on her knees. She tried to press the places where the pain burned, but her hands trembled. Rocco circled her, nudged her with his nose, let out a deep whine. He did not let her fall. "Easy, champ," she whispered, searching his gaze. "I'm here." The other nurse finally reached her, knelt beside Laura, and began assessing quickly, calmly. "Breathe with me," she said. "Help is coming. Keep your eyes open." The orderly locked the side door and called for backup. The guards came in, checked the perimeter, called the police. In seconds, the hallway filled, hands pressing, voices giving orders, a stretcher arriving like a lifeline. Rocco placed his front paws on the stretcher and refused to move away. It was necessary for Don Ernesto, who had woken with the commotion, to arrive limping, to speak in the firm voice only he could use. "Rocco, at my side. Good boy. Here with me." The dog obeyed, but did not take his eyes off Laura for a single moment. As they carried her away, the ceiling of the hallway passed above her like a pale ribbon. The neon lights looked like cold stars. Laura thought of her mother, of the flowers she didn't buy, of her patients' names. She thought of the promise she had made to herself every morning, to be there to care. She had kept it. Don't let me go," she murmured. "We won't let you go," the nurse answered. "You're with us." They reached the procedure room. Skilled hands cut fabric, cleaned, counted wounds, secured lines. A voice marked, 7 stab wounds. "Stable, conscious. We'll contain and transfer to surgery if needed." Another voice asked for more light, more gauze, more calm. Rocco and Ernesto waited outside, at the edge of the doorway, with the guard blocking their path, but not rejecting their presence. The entire hospital felt the shock, as if its foundations had been shaken. What had been routine had exploded into violence. And at the center of it all, a nurse who chose to stand in front of a dog so the blade would not reach him. The clock, relentless, kept moving forward. With every second, the night was changing shape. Nothing would ever be the same again. Before the door of the room closed, Laura caught sight of Ernesto, standing tall like an old tree, with wet eyes and a dry voice. "Thank you, miss," he said, carrying the weight of 1,000 battles. "Thank you." The door shut, and inside only the ordered sounds of medical care remained. Outside, the murmur grew. Police taking notes, guards checking cameras, staff repeating the same story in different words. He came through the side. He was after the dog. She stepped in between. 7 times. She's still conscious. Rocco lay down by the base of the door, guarding the threshold as if it were a post on the front line. No one moved him from there. Before continuing with this exciting story, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the bell so you won't miss more stories like this one. Now then, let's continue. The operating room lights had never seemed so intense. Laura, who had spent thousands of hours in that same hospital caring for others, now found herself lying on the stretcher, surrounded by green gowns, under the relentless glare of the medical spotlights. The smell of disinfectant and latex filled the air. For the first time, she was not taking notes, not adjusting IVs, not calming patients. Now she was the one in the middle of the fight. The doctors who had known her for years worked with a mix of professionalism and anguish. There was camaraderie in every gesture. Dr. Ramirez, a surgeon with whom Laura had shared countless night shifts, gave the order in a firm voice. "Pressure here. More gauze. Stabilize the line." A resident counted the wounds out loud. 7. For superficial, 3 more dangerous. One was too close to a lung. Another, risky, in the abdomen. Every second mattered. Laura's heartbeat showed on the monitor, irregular but strong, like a distant drum. Meanwhile, in the waiting room, the atmosphere was different. Don Ernesto stood leaning on his cane, lips pressed together. His eyes never left the closed door. At his side, Rocco lay still, only lifting his head whenever someone came in or out. The dog seemed to feel everything, as if he understood that the woman who had so often given him a gentle touch was now fighting her own war. A young nurse, who had once been Laura's student, approached Ernesto. "She is strong," she said softly. "I know because I learned from her." The veteran nodded, but did not answer. His silence spoke louder than words. He knew what it was like to wait for news in the middle of a battle. And now he was on the other side, unarmed, unable to do anything. The news spread quickly inside the hospital. Doctors, patients, and staff spoke in hushed voices about what had happened. Some could not believe it. The most dedicated nurse, the one who was always there for everyone, had been attacked inside her own workplace. Others called her brave, and some were already speaking of a miracle, simply because she was still alive after so many stab wounds. On local social media and in group chats, the information began to circulate. Nurse stabbed defending veteran's dog. The headline repeated again and again, shared among neighbors and acquaintances. It didn't take long to ignite the community's outrage. Inside the operating room, Laura's pulse suddenly dropped. A red line zigzagged across the screen, and the monitor's sound turned sharp and urgent. "She's crashing," one of the residents shouted. The team reacted instantly. Compressions, ventilation, drugs. One eternal minute, then another. Until at last, the monitor found a rhythm again. Weak, but there. The whole room exhaled at the same time. "You're not leaving Laura," whispered Dr. Ramirez, never taking her eyes off the wound. "Not today." Outside, time seemed frozen. Every door that opened made Ernesto straighten, waiting for news. But the doctors walked past, focused, not stopping. The clock moved slowly, marking the tension. Rocco, silently, lifted his nose toward the ceiling and let out a soft whine. It was a low sound, but heavy with anguish. Ernesto stroked his head, murmuring, "Easy, son. She's going to pull through this." On social media, the story kept growing. Neighbors began to organize an improvised vigil at the hospital entrance. Candles, messages of support, prayers. People who didn't even know her arrived with flowers, outraged by what had happened. The story of the nurse who protected a veteran's dog touched something deep in everyone. Courage, loyalty, sacrifice. Meanwhile, in the operating room, the work did not stop. Every wound was closed with precision. Every stitch was a promise of life. The battle was silent but intense, fought with scalpels and steady hands instead of weapons. Laura, unconscious, seemed to float between two worlds, the brightness of the room and the darkness of fainting. Finally, after hours of effort, Dr. Ramirez stepped back slightly and announced, "Stable for now. She must be monitored for the next 24 hours. We can't claim victory yet." The team breathed with relief, though no one smiled. They knew there was still a long road ahead. When they wheeled the stretcher out of the operating room, Ernesto came as close as he could. He saw her pale, with tubes and bandages but breathing. Rocco rose immediately and walked by her side, never leaving. The doctors allowed the dog to follow her to the recovery room, understanding that his presence could be as vital as any medicine. Laura did not open her eyes, but her weak hand moved slightly when Rocco touched her with his nose. It was a tiny gesture, but enough for Ernesto, for the first time that night, to let out a sigh of relief. The whole hospital, which had been holding its breath, began to ease a little. Outside, the vigil grew. Neighbors lit more candles. Local media arrived. No one knew yet, but this story was about to reach much farther than they could imagine. Because somewhere, hundreds of kilometers away, there were men listening to the news. Men who understood better than anyone what a bond between a veteran and his dog meant. Men who would not let the story end there. The hospital was no longer just a place of healing. It had become the center of an echo that spread beyond its walls. What had happened with Laura, the nurse stabbed 7 times for defending a service dog, was no longer a secret. First, it was whispered through hallways, then in the local newspapers, and within hours the news was on social media, multiplying in posts, comments, and improvised videos. Images of the vigil in front of the hospital circulated everywhere. Lit candles, flowers at the entrance, neighbors holding signs that read, "Thank you, brave nurse," and "Rocco is also a hero." The story was repeated in different words, but always with the same heart. A woman had risked everything to defend what many considered sacred, the loyalty between a soldier and his dog. One of the first to share the news was an independent journalist who had a veteran brother. He uploaded a short video to a social network. This woman did not know the attacker. She could have stepped aside, but she didn't. She stood in the way and took 7 stab wounds to protect a veteran's dog. Today she is fighting for her life. That video went viral within hours. The story quickly crossed borders. It reached private veteran forums, support groups for retired soldiers, and soon, less visible communication channels where former members of special forces shared experiences and news with each other. That was where everything changed. At a naval base on the other side of the country, a group of ex-Navy SEALs was gathered in a common room. Some trained, others chatted about past missions. One of them, nicknamed Hawk, received a message on his phone. He opened it and read in silence. The room slowly noticed his expression harden. "What's wrong?" asked Bear, a strong companion. As he dropped the weights he had been using, Hawk lifted his gaze, frowning. A nurse defended a service dog. She was stabbed 7 times. She's alive by a miracle. Silence fell over the room. They all knew what a service dog meant to a veteran. It was not just an animal. It was a companion who often stopped the past from consuming them, a guardian who understood without words the invisible wounds of war. Another, nicknamed Doc, broke the silence. A veteran's dog? Then she protected much more than an animal. She protected a part of him. The news spread from group to group. Some SEALs in service read it on their breaks, others in their homes, others in closed forums. It didn't matter where they were. When they heard the story, they felt they could not remain mere spectators. Because to them, Laura was not just any nurse. She had acted like one of their own. She had protected a fallen brother, no matter the cost. And that kind of loyalty was the essence of their unwritten code. Within hours, the conversation became a silent agreement. No official order was given, but everyone understood the message. They had to respond, not with meaningless violence, but with presence, with support, with the strength of a brotherhood that never abandons those who show honor. Some began sending messages. "It's not just her, it's what she represents. An act like this cannot go unnoticed. If a brother is hurt, we are all there." And as if joined by an invisible network, they began to move. XSLS, active ones, retirees, young and old veterans. Distance didn't matter. The rumor turned into commitment. Suddenly, someone said the phrase that marked the final decision. "She bled for one of ours. Now we will be there for her." The news, which had begun in a dark hospital hallway, had crossed oceans and reached a lethal brotherhood, known for acting in the shadows, but also for its unbreakable loyalty. In the following hours, while Laura remained connected to monitors, unconscious in her bed, and Rocco rested at the foot of the door, something was forming. Hundreds of men in dark uniforms were preparing to appear, not with weapons raised, but with the silent strength of a promise, to protect the one who had protected what they valued most. Dawn would bring more than light. It would bring the arrival of an invisible army that, by making itself visible, would change the course of everything. The rumor was no longer a rumor. What had begun as a homemade video, later turned into local news, and finally into a topic of conversation among veterans, had transformed into a spark that ignited something much larger. In different parts of the country, and even beyond, men in dark uniforms, some active and others retired, had decided the same thing without needing to say much. They would not let Laura face alone what she had done for one of their own. There were no official meetings, no speeches. The movement was born from brief calls, short messages, emails that said only what was needed. "See you there." She earned it. "It's for all of us." The invisible network of the Navy SEALs was activated, as if a silent order ran from hand to hand. At a base near the coast, 12 men boarded a private transport, carrying light backpacks. In another city, a group of retired SEALs, now shooting instructors or fitness trainers, left their routines and headed for the same destination. Others traveled on commercial flights, camouflaged among ordinary passengers, but with the same determined look. They carried no visible weapons and did not seek attention. Each one knew that the strength of their presence would be enough. It was a show of unity, not of war. And although the numbers might seem exaggerated to any civilian, for them it was natural. If one life deserves protection, then all show up. The motivations were clear. Laura had done what any of them would have done in combat. Protect the fallen comrade, without thinking of the cost. She was not a SEAL, nor a soldier, nor a veteran. She was a nurse. But that detail did not matter. Her act placed her in the same line as them, in the same invisible code that guided them. Never abandon the brother. In an improvised hangar, one of the oldest, nicknamed Chief, spoke before a group of 30 men. She didn't wear a uniform. She had no training. And still, she threw herself into danger to save a dog that means much more than a dog. For that veteran, that animal is the reason to keep going. That touches all of us. A respectful silence followed his words. There was no applause. None was needed. The decision was already made. Within hours, they were counted by dozens, then by hundreds. Someone did the math. There were already almost 300 confirmed. 300 men who, on different highways, airports, and side roads, were heading to the same hospital where Laura lay under machines and care. While the city slept, the logistics moved forward. Dark vehicles traveled in caravans. Small groups arrived on night flights. Others advanced quietly on foot to the surroundings. It was an organized but discreet deployment, as if they wanted to show strength without provoking fear. In a cafe near a service station, two of them spoke in low voices. Do you think so much movement is worth it for one single person? It's not one person, the other replied, without hesitation. It's what she represents. If we let this pass, what kind of men are we? Every answer was the same everywhere. It was not just about Laura, or a dog, or a veteran. It was about what unites those who have seen war, and know that loyalty is measured in actions, not words. Some, silently, remembered nights of combat, when a quick decision by a comrade had saved their life. Others thought of the times when a service dog had pulled them out of an anxiety attack or a painful memory. Each one had a personal reason, but all agreed on the same thing. She had done what they recognized as the greatest honor. The news that hundreds of Navy SEALs were mobilizing began to leak into military forums. No one confirmed it publicly, but the rumors grew. They're heading to the hospital. There are too many. They're going to protect her. The idea of 300 elite men acting as one was starting to sound like legend, like those stories that seem impossible until someone tells them with proof. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Ernesto remained beside Rocco. The veteran did not yet know what was happening beyond those walls. He only watched the door of the room where Laura fought to survive. But kilometers away, a silent army was drawing near. The dawn would greet them with the echo of engines, firm boots, and steps that seemed synchronized without any rehearsal. 300 elite men, moving for a just cause, ready to show that courage is never forgotten and that loyalty always finds an answer. The sun was just peeking over the horizon when the city opened its eyes to a dawn unlike any before. The air was cold, and a soft breeze swept through the still sleepy streets. The bakeries lit their ovens, the first buses began their routes, and some early rising neighbors went out for a walk. Everything seemed normal, until they began to notice something different. On the corners, on the sidewalks, at the entrances of buildings, men dressed plainly but firmly began to appear. Some with dark jackets, others with discreet caps, all with the same posture, straight, alert, as if every step was measured. They did not speak loudly or make sudden movements. They were there, present, silent, and just seeing them was enough to understand they were not ordinary people. Within minutes, the rumor spread. "They're military," some whispered. "No, they're veterans," others said. Someone else, incredulous, added, "They say they're Navy SEALs, and that they came for the nurse." The streets around the hospital slowly filled. Caravans of vehicles arrived without noise. They parked in order. Groups of men stepped out and positioned themselves in strategic points, as if they had rehearsed that scene for years. There were no visible weapons, no flags, no banners. Only the silent strength of 300 men moving as one body. Inside the hospital, staff looked out the windows in amazement. Nurses, doctors, and patients approached to understand what was happening. No one had ever seen anything like it. Outside, the crowd of neighbors keeping the night vigil with candles found themselves surrounded by imposing figures who, instead of intimidating, gave off a strange sense of safety. An older woman, who had brought flowers for Laura, stopped in front of one of them and asked softly, "Is it true? Did you come for her?" The man, wearing a cap that partly covered his face, only nodded. The woman smiled through her tears. "Then she is not alone." The news spread quickly. Local media arrived with cameras, and soon the images went across the country. 300 Navy SEALs deployed around a hospital, firm, calm, like a human wall of protection. At every corner, 2 or 3 stood watch discreetly. At the entrances, others controlled the flow of people. Everything was done respectfully, without interrupting normal life, but with a force impossible to ignore. The contrast was overwhelming. The night before, Laura had been the victim of a brutal act of violence. An armed man had tried to steal the peace of everyone in that place. Now, the same city that had felt fear woke up with the certainty that the strongest protection had arrived. Where there had been shadows and stabbings, now there was light and unity. The comments came quickly. "I've never seen anything like this. It looks like a movie, but it's real. All this for a nurse. Imagine what her act means." Inside the hospital, Ernesto watched from a second-floor window. At his side, Rocco, restless, wagged his tail as if recognizing the men arriving. The veteran, with a broken voice, murmured, "They understood. They know what she did for me and for him." The hospital filled with a different atmosphere. It was not fear. It was not tension. It was respect. The staff worked more calmly. The patients felt protected, and the neighbors' vigil multiplied. People brought food, water, and handwritten messages. "Stay strong, Laura. Thank you for protecting what we love. You are not alone." The SEALs were not seeking recognition. No one gave speeches. No one shouted slogans. They were simply there, firm, showing with their presence alone that loyalty is a language that needs no translation. Some journalists tried to interview the men, but got only brief answers. "We are here for her. An act like this deserves an answer. We don't leave our own behind." The dawn became a symbol. It was the image of a silent army that, without firing a single shot, had turned fear into safety. And for Laura, still unconscious in her room, each heartbeat was accompanied by the echo of 300 guardians willing to wait as long as needed. In the city, people began to understand that this was not just about a hospital or an isolated attack. It was something greater. It was proof that a single act of courage can awaken the unity of hundreds, and that even in times of distrust, loyalty and honor could still move multitudes. The sun fully rose, bathing the streets in golden light. The SEALs, motionless in their posts, looked like living statues. The rumor became certainty. The nurse was not alone, and no attacker would dare return while that human wall surrounded her. If this story touched your heart, tell us in the comments which part moved you the most. Don't forget to subscribe, turn on the bell, and give a like so you won't miss more stories like this one. See you next time!